Cozy Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about general vocal processing, general vocal mixing. Let me give you an example so that you know this is worth your time. So here I've got a vocal. It is in my track 8-Bit Jam. I'm going to play it for you without effects. I'm going to bring up the gain on the vocal because the effects, I'm going to gain match it so you can make better comparisons. So here we go. I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't want to go through a closed door. So buckle up and settle in, because I'm getting down to my 8-Bit Jam. So that's before processing. Let's go ahead and reduce the volume and turn on the effects, and this is with processing. I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't want to go through a closed door. So buckle up and settle in, because I'm getting down to my 8-Bit Jam. So I'm going to be showing you how to accomplish something like that. Now, mixing, I'm going to be covering overarching principles. I'm not going to be going into all the details of what it is exactly I've done, because that's just less useful than understanding the principles. Another thing is I have a cool example over here. Now this piece in 8-Bit is called 8-Bit Jam, and I do a little bit of scat in it. And let me show you what I did to the scat. I treated it separately. So that's with effects, this is without. So you see, that's quite a bit more dull. And here it is without. With. So it's pretty straightforward. We're just going to make things pop out in a way that's dynamic. The way you go about doing this, though, if you understand the principles, will set you up for a good mix and something that you could potentially make very loud. Now, I didn't want to get like crazy loud with this. I wanted a different feel for the track and the mastering process. So I treated it a smidge different. But let's go ahead and talk about this vocal. So stage one of vocal is always record. And people totally play down the importance. The new people do. The older people, the people who've been around for a while and know how to record, they play this up a lot. They're like, man, freaking get a solid recording. Why is that? Because there are people who will fix things in the mix, and there are people who will fix things before they ever have to fix things in the mix. So, for example, if a particular mic isn't driving with a particular singer, get them a different mic if you have one. If you don't, like right now, I pretty much own a couple mics, and then I have to go to the studio for everything else. So if I'm going to record something at home, I'm pretty much just going to use a Shure SM57. That's what I use. It's a fine mic. It does good. I recorded this with a Shure SM57. Now, another thing you want to be aware of when you're recording is you want to be aware of the peaks. So we have some peaks here, and also you want to be aware of the singer's mannerisms, because if they're singing and then they sing like this and then they get back here because they feel something weird and then they get up because they're singing, they're doing music. Like who the crap knows what's going on when you're making music? So they could get really loud and really soft though, because they're changing their position to the mic. So it's going to sound really different, and you're going to have these issues. So you have a couple options. You could coach your singer and get them to sing at a consistent thing, but that could take away from, the vibe of whatever it is they're doing. So you want to be careful about damaging the vibe. So good singers are going to naturally do this. So also move the mic almost like natural compression. So if they're going to sing really loud, they'll naturally back the mic off. And they kind of compress for you. And usually it's much better than anything we can do, because they know they're going to sing loud before they sing loud. So they can make a judgment. It's like the ultimate look ahead limiter, I think. Well, not really, because it's the human element. The other thing you want to be considerate of is if you have clips, redo your take. I've seen people, I'm not going to name any names, but I've run into a number of people who actually try to work with clip takes because they just don't know. So if your audio waveform goes up and then just becomes a line, or it goes past, like it hits the roof of whatever it is, then you're going to want to re-record that. And the last part is you want to be aware of the dynamic range. So if we listen, let me real quick show you what I'm talking about. This one's pretty easy to hear. Let's go to the vocal. Let's turn off the processing and turn up the vocal. And let's just listen to it. I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't want to go through. So that sounds pretty darn even already. But let me really quick give you a more extreme edition. It sounds like I've seen that look in your eyes before. Like it sounds like not necessarily like that. I'm messing with it, but some parts are like really soft. Some parts are just, there's just this up and down thing in this one. I've seen that look in your eyes before, but what does this mean? Well, in a mix where if I had more elements going on at that time, something like this, maybe, let's see here. Where's some good peaks? Let's zoom it up so we can see better. Okay, so maybe this will get through, but maybe the front half of this will be masked by the rest of the stuff going on, and then this will get through, and then this will get through, but this might not get through as clear, and you run into issues. And depending on where things are in the spectrum of your voice, you could run into misunderstandings of how words are pronounced, all sorts of things. So you want to make sure you've got a decent dynamic range condensed. That made no sense. You want to make sure that they're not like crazy. Like they don't sing like this, like something really loud and then soft. That's basically it. Now, some styles of music that's very, very favorable towards. So we're talking about like just general pop music, I guess, is sort of what we're idealizing. This isn't a pop song, but it's I was going for electro swing. So that's that. Now, a couple other things on the voice. So on the voice, we have a frequency spectrum because we when we talk, we're emitting frequencies out of our voice. And there are different sections that if you manipulate will change the way your voice is perceived. So first off, there's the attack of your voice, these transient moments where I go hello. That's like hello. Like that's a longer one versus two. Two is a much shorter thing. So if you change the way, if you were to take two and go Sue. Like if you try to take away that initial transient, you're gonna change the actual word, and it's gonna make it more difficult to understand what you're saying. On an EQ, the ranges of what are called sibilants generally are around 6K and up. They're over there, like the stew, sue, taco, things like that. And words like, or not words, but sounds like or buh are generally lower tones, and they're going to reside down below 500 hertz. A guy's voice is an octave lower than a girl's voice. That's another fun fact, usually. So when you're messing with things, you want to be aware that it's pretty straightforward, but a general awareness of just like, oh, I'm messing with this part. That's okay. So that's like a little bit about the frequency spectrum of the voice. Now let's dive into, we are now at a spot where like, hey, we've recorded it. We've got a good solid recording that we can work with. And let's go ahead and begin to manipulate this. And we understand some of the things that we're facing. We don't want to boost any like one frequency, because if we do that, it's going to eat our headroom. So that later on when we try to like master it and stuff, it's going to become a big issue. So you want to, it's an art. So let's get into this. Okay, so on the vocal, I've got these processing effects. And let's turn them on one by one and talk about what it is. So some people will record with a compressor in the chain before it even goes to the console. Like the voice will go through a compressor before it even reaches the console to be recorded. If you're recording at home, you're probably going to record into your audio interface. Maybe you don't have a compressor and it'll go there. They just like the analog sound of that compressor, and they're just reducing this dynamic range that we talked about earlier. That way it sounds more consistent. You notice if we turn on this, it sounds way more consistent as far as volume's concerned.
I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't want to go through a closed door, so buckle up.
So some people may or may not like that. Also, I forgot to... Oh, dang it. I don't know what I settled on. Somewhere down there.
I've seen that look in your eyes before.
But you see, I can have it be much softer and everything sings through because it's way more consistent. Some people are against this as a philosophy. That's a topic for another day. So the first thing I do is I touch it up with a little bit of upwards compression.
I've seen that look in your eyes before.
So if we listen to it before and after, so here's before.
I've seen that look in your eyes before.
Here's after.
I've seen that look in your eyes before.
So you can hear that upper end coming out just a little bit. And to do that, I'm using a multi-band compressor, and I'm using upwards compression on the high band. Now, if you're not familiar with this, upwards compression, we're not going to get into the details of upwards compression. Essentially, this would be upwards compression versus this would be a type of expansion, because I'm ignoring parts of the envelope. Something you can't do that. I mean, this would be a threshold, but then if you were to do something like this, now you're getting a really specific expansion, and some people would argue it's wave shaping, but it uses a compression envelope, so I'm calling it expansion. The details get a little confusing, but basically instead of turning the peaks down, I'm turning things up according to where they land in this envelope. If you want to know how to use Maximus, go check out my Maximus from the ground up. Not Maximus from the ground up, FL12 Effects series. I'll put a link in the description. There'll be a link in the description that takes you to this if you want to learn how to use Maximus. So anyways, I'm boosting the high end just a touch.
I've seen that look in your eyes before.
And those little green specks at the top represent the difference. So you notice it's gotten louder. And it's the output technically. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into our next step. It's a multi-band compressor again. And this time I'm going after the mid-range. We have a little C for our compression, and then we also have our input. So this is what's coming in. The red line that will show up here is the compression.
I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't want to go.
And I'm applying some makeup gain. So before this,
I've seen that look in your eyes before.
After,
I've seen that look in your eyes before.
So it gave me a quality that I dialed in, and I messed with this more as I went down the chain. So I didn't settle on this at the beginning. But anyways, I'm taming parts of the spectrum, and I'm definitely attacking that in particular, I'm attacking this range of frequencies. I used my ear to set this. I don't see a readout on here on the particular band setting. So you just kind of have to use your ears with this one. And then, oh no, and then we go into an EQ. So this EQ is turning things up. Now, some people are very against using EQs to turn things up. Why are they against using EQs to turn things up? Because there's just, I don't know, there's this weird stigma that goes on. And some people say, oh, you might as well just turn up the volume. I'm against that as well because this is a way more exact volume knob than this will ever be. This is just like general volume. So I like this. So you're taught at the beginning that if you're boosting a lot, then you might as well just turn the volume up. And that's okay, except for this is a way more specific way of turning things up. And you notice I found an offending frequency that I didn't quite like.
I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't.
There was an issue there, so I dialed that out and I just boosted in general and took up some of these like the mids and the highs. So we got our low mids. They named them up there for us. You notice that I have quite a bit of low end ambience.
I've seen that look in your eyes before.
Like you can see it down there. And you might be going, why don't you high pass that out? Like that's like not okay. La 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 la. A lot of people are against that because it eats up, just space in your mix. I left it there because of the style that I'm working with. Some people will constantly be rolling that out just out of habit, and it robs your low end. If you do that, all your atmospheric room tone is going to be up here. It's going to sound weird and thin. So I wanted some of that low end to fill it out. And I filtered out the really, really low stuff. I didn't need that stuff, but I left it in there just for that reason. If I had a lot more stuff going on and I wasn't going to be missed as much, then yeah, sure, I could get rid of it. It's not going to make a big difference now. It's one of those subtle details that I just tossed in there. That was my reasoning behind it. And yes, I am using a sound goodizer. If you're curious, you can go to preset C and see exactly what it's doing. You might be going, why are you using a sound goodizer instead of making the set yourself? And the reason is, someone else made these presets. They're going to do things differently than I am. So I kind of like tossing these in every now and then. I know it's going to do some sort of compression or expansion or something because it's Maximus. They're just presets in Maximus. And so I tossed it on there and I put on C because I liked what C was doing and I dialed it in. Sometimes it's that simple. It's kind of fun to just throw a compressor, go through presets someone else has done and see what they did and see what it does to your vocal. I think that sort of experimentation is useful and it lets you grow because then if it does something that you really like, you can go and check it out. So I dialed it in according to what I want. This is quite a substantial change. So let me turn it off.
I've seen that look in your eyes before.
Okay, here it is with it.
I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't want to go.
And I thought that I liked that a lot. So if maybe some of you guys are like, oh no, like I know someone out there is going to be like deeply offended by this eventually. So we get over here to the Fruity Reverb 2, and this is just the space.
I've seen that look in your eyes before.
So I add in some reverb to help it out. And on this, I have a low cut and a high cut set like so. And this is just the settings. You see it's a very short reverb, not very long. And that's pretty much all that I'm doing to this voice. And at the end of the day,
I've seen that look.
You get that. Now, we've been listening to it in isolation. When you make these moves, I try to listen with it being compared to various elements and then all together. Because if crap sounds good by itself and then you put it all together, it almost always sounds like a bunch of stuff that used to sound good by itself, but it sounds like crap together. So you want things that sound really great together, and if you isolate them, they could sound bad. Like no one cares if they sound bad by themselves, if they sound awesome together, because no one's gonna go through your track and listen to it one by one. So yeah, so that's another thing is we've been listening to isolation. That's sort of a rookie move too. You want to be listening in context.
I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't want to go through.
That will also influence my EQ decisions quite heavily because I'll be like, oh, I want to make some room for like maybe over here a snare or something, or I want to make room for the kick more, so I'll put a bigger dip there. In this case, I didn't want to do any of that jazz. It was fine the way it was.
I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't want to go through a closed door.
Because it masking this is the effect that I wanted. Masking isn't always a bad thing. People make it sound like a bad thing, but it also adds to blend and a couple other things. So you don't want to just completely eliminate masking. Let's go over the scat. So that's the general vocal processing. So let's go real quick recap before we go to the scat. You record your vocal, you do a decent job, you watch out for dynamic range, you make sure you don't clip in. If you can, you change spaces, you try a couple things, you get a vocal take that sounds freaking killer. You apply a little bit of compression. Generally, oh yeah, let's go over that multiband compressor on the method on the compression. this compression curve is at a threshold. I don't know. I set my threshold according to my ear. And then the ratio I set at 1 to 4. Very, very common. Or 4 to 1, I mean. So for every 1 to 4, 4 to 1. I forgot what order it goes in. But anyways, for every 4 decibels that it goes past my threshold, only 1 gets out. So it's reducing the volume, smoothing out the vocals. The attack and release, that's the art of setting a compressor. You want to set a good attack and release so that it ideally doesn't really color your vocal, as trying to be as transparent as possible, but still giving you that extra headroom so that things are just more consistent. So you see I'm using traditional expansion and compression, or upwards compression and just regular compression. And on the scat, we'll get an example of the upwards compression in a much more extreme form. So you apply your compression, and you're just watching out for your peaks, trying to get things on an average to sound louder. That's pretty much what the sound goodizer is doing as well. Then you do a little bit of EQ, get the contour that you want. Don't be afraid to boost, but also cutting is most people you want to cut usually. I know this is very counterintuitive, but honestly, I do a lot of both, and I just do whatever I think I need to do. Like, I don't try to limit myself by opinions or whatever. I'll try it. If I like it, great. But you also want to be careful of possible issues you could be creating by boosting things. You could be creating a issue with headroom later on down the line that could become like, you could make your master less effective, and your mix down could sound maybe more crushed. So we don't want that. But you also see that I'm turning it down here. I just like the timbral change, and that's the best way I went about getting it. So you do a little bit of EQ. You might follow up with a little bit more compression. I often find putting 4 or 5 compressors in a row, all doing 1 dB of compression, can be more effective than one compressor trying to do the whole thing, which is why, as you see, I have 3 compressors here. Now, this one's doing quite a bit, though. So, but on a multiband compressor is basically 4 compressors, 1 big compressor, and then 3 small ones. So it's sort of like there's a lot of different stages that have options of controlling over. And then finally, a little bit of space. You may consider using a delay instead, or a different type of reverb. This is algorithmic reverb. It works for me. Now let's go over here to the scat. I'm going to treat it the same way, except for this time I hit it up with an EQ, and that's changing the way it's going to hit Maximus. So on this EQ, I boosted up a little bit. I decided these 2 areas of the spectrum would go well together. And so I did some listening and decided on that. If we come over here and listen to it. My bad, wrong button. Here's it without processing. So you see, this actually isn't as big a change, but as we get over here, it becomes a little more apparent. Because I go much lower in the spectrum. So it becomes more obvious. So I decided to go on a boost there, and let's do a before and after of this. Versus. Now I know someone's freaking out about clipping right now. Cool your jets, whoever you are. I'm just telling you that. All right, so that's what I do first. Next, we hit Maximus. Maximus is, of course, doing upwards compression on all 3 bands, the lowest band being the most extreme. I'm getting lower, and I said this by ear. You bring it up, you try messing with it. It's essentially a really cool EQ. It's basically a dynamic EQ, but with options presented to you in a different sort of way. You can change the bands by going in there, and again, you can go check out the Maximus and the FL12 effects. So I'm applying upwards compression as opposed to regular compression. One of the reasons why I like doing it this way is regular compression brings up noise in a different way. I can't really explain technically what I mean, but I've noticed that when I compress something regularly, and now in a multiband compressor, if you compress the mids, it's going to bring up mid noise a little bit differently. This, as you see, applies a curve. So if you were to do general compression, bring it down like so, you're going to get something that sounds really different when you turn up the volume, because it's going to apply this curve going down. It's a totally different process. If you do it like this, the noise down here, most of what you will find is the noise will often be in this part of the stage of the envelope. And so the more general expansion will happen up here. The reason why I call this upwards compression, rather than crushing things and turn them down, it turns them up when it reaches a particular part of the envelope. Here, if I do something like this is now expansion technically, because compression, you can't do shapes like this with upwards compression. And this would be a crazy form of expansion, and we could even call it wave shaping if we set our attack and release right. So this behaves really differently. So, well, it behaves like a wave shaper is what I mean. So that's the Maximus. Up next, we have the Fruitio Stereo Enhancer. This was more of an experiment than anything. I opened it up and began to mess with, I believe I touched the stereo separation knob principally. It was a while since I touched this. And I may have just gone into, nope, I just went in and messed with it. So I'm just doing this to get an interesting stereo image because it's going to sound a lot more full if I have it coming out the edges. And we're going to get into doubling later on in other videos. But stereo images should be a really main concern when you're doing this. You notice I actually have panning. So on the stereo image side of things, you want to be careful about destroying your mono compatibility with your voice, because if your voice is really wide between speakers and you haven't taken into consideration mono compatibility, sometimes when you play it over your phone, suddenly your voice sounds like a phased mess, and you don't want that. So what you can do is, I like to do a mix of stereo movements, and I prefer actually discrete panning to use. I like that quite a bit. So I like to do that, or if I'm going to use a big stereo image, I'll put something in the middle just a touch, just as sort of damage control, and then you do a couple comparisons and get something that you like so that it'll function on both. I think getting the stereo, I wouldn't sacrifice any decisions you're going to make in stereo though for mono. If someone's going to listen to your thing as a piece of art, they're going to listen in stereo the way you made it. So don't worry too much about it, but it is a consideration because a lot of people listen over their phones when they're showing their friend a really cool song. So you don't want to ruin that opportunity. So another thing about stereo is when you do that, you have options to move things around, and this creates so much room. And keep in mind, there's different pan laws. We're not going to get into that. In FL, you can actually change them. I learned that a little while ago. But that basically changed. Your left speaker will receive a different amount of signal than your right speaker. And that was probably backwards to you, but it's correct to me. And this means that the way the cone is going to react and the way the cone is going to react, that sounds like so crazy. The way the different amounts of signal are going to react differently, because right now their phase relationship is one thing, and if suddenly they receive a lot more of like your voice than the other speaker, first off, you're going to be given way stronger spatial cues, saying like the interaural timing difference, or in this case, it would be the interaural intensity difference, will say, oh, the voice is over there now, and it's going to sound way bigger. Even these on like subtle levels, like just itsy bitsy pan movements, you see this going up just a little bit, that can really change it because your brain's going to receive these things. Now, you might not always notice it immediately, but there'll be these subtle changes in the way the signal sums that I really think adds a dynamic, interesting level to the mix. You can't quite say what's going on, but it definitely feels a little bit different. And it's when you start stacking a bunch of these decisions that it becomes more apparent, and I find the effect quite enjoyable. But right now, I'm sort of doing a minimal amount of that. So that's my little spiel on mono versus stereo and being careful about it. And don't be afraid to get creative with creating an interesting moving stereo image. Maybe before your drop, you bring everything to mono, and then bam, at your drop, you go all stereo, like crazy big room style things. And you keep your most important stuff like your kick there in the middle. So before it's getting masked, you have masking working in your advantage, and then it comes out in its full glory, and you've got all this room. It's so cool. A really dynamic, impactful moment. So that's true of everything, not just voice. Most of these principles apply to a lot more than just the voice. And next up, we'll go through an EQ. Now, I do this boost because that's what I felt like I needed to do. Those were the areas. And I was, again, listening in context. And then finally, the last boost. And on the last, not the last boost, the last cut. And you might be going, why did you boost here and then cut here? Well, remember that thing I said about the volume, this right here? Some people are going to tell you, especially if you're new, if you boost a bunch, you might as well just turn up the volume, but this is a way more exact volume knob, right? So this has got me the timbre that I want, and then I find it more helpful to open up an entirely different EQ. It's like a whole fresh slate, and then I can make it the way I want it. So even though this cut, I could put it in here, I guarantee you, as a creative process, I would have had a much harder time, because at this moment in time, I'm focusing on some other aspect of the sound. And on this one, I'm addressing another aspect of the sound. So you see, I have 3 EQs in here and a compressor. So that's just my 2 cents on it as a process. And it's something that people don't bring up. They usually just talk about the roles, what you can do with an EQ. But as far as workflow goes, they sort of leave you in the dust as far as what to do. They literally just tell you, just do a bunch of stuff, figure it out. That's really true. So I'm not hating on them for it or anything, because that's what I did. That's just something I noticed. Anyways, that's that. So that's how I got my vocals to sound the way they did. That's some general vocal processing. We're going to be taking some look at some more extreme effects later on down the line. But that's that. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.